If your mind feels busy, if your thoughts keep circling long after the day has ended, this quiet moment is for you. Some nights our minds carry more than they should. Worries about tomorrow, questions we cannot answer, thoughts that refuse to slow down. But tonight, we will gently set those things down together. Tonight, we will walk slowly through peaceful moments from the Bible. Stories that remind us that even in the middle of uncertainty, God is still present. Stories where fear gave way to peace, where storms turned calm, where tired hearts found rest again. And in each of these stories, there is a quiet reminder that even when life feels overwhelming, God has not forgotten you. Even when your thoughts feel heavy, hope is still alive, so take a slow breath. Allow your shoulders to relax. Let the noise of the day slowly fade. And before we begin our first story tonight, let us start with a simple prayer. Dear God, tonight we come before you with minds that feel tired and full. Some of us are carrying worries that have followed us all day, thoughts about things we cannot control, questions about the future, memories that return when everything else grows quiet. You see every thought that passes through our minds. You know the burdens we carry, even the ones we struggle to explain. Tonight, we ask for something simple: peace. A quieting of our thoughts, a gentle calm that settles deep within our hearts. Remind us that we do not have to solve everything tonight. Remind us that tomorrow is already in your hands, even when we feel uncertain. Help us remember that you are still guiding our steps, that you are still working in our lives. That hope is never as far away as it sometimes feels. Let your presence surround us tonight like still water. Let our thoughts grow softer, slower, quieter. And as we listen to these stories tonight, help our hearts remember that no storm lasts forever. Amen. Jesus calms the storm. Our first story tonight comes from a moment when the disciples faced a frightening storm at sea and discovered that peace was closer than they realized. Long ago, along the gentle shores of the Sea of Galilee, the day had been filled with activity. Crowds had gathered from nearby villages and distant towns. They came hoping to hear Jesus speak, hoping to witness something extraordinary, hoping to find answers to the questions they carried in their hearts. As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, the crowds began to thin. Families returned home along the dusty paths that wound between the hills. The air grew quieter. The long day was finally coming to an end. The sun hovered low above the horizon. Its warm golden light stretched across the surface of the water, creating a peaceful glow that shimmered softly across the lake. The Sea of Galilee lay calm and wide before them. Gentle waves moved slowly across its surface. Small fishing boats rested along the shoreline, rocking quietly as the evening breeze passed over the water. Jesus had spent the entire day teaching. His voice had carried across the hills as he shared stories and wisdom with those who had gathered. Now, after such a long day, he turned to his disciples and spoke a simple invitation. "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." The disciples nodded and began preparing the boat. They pushed the small wooden vessel away from the shore. The water parted softly as the boat glided forward. One by one, the disciples climbed inside. Several of them were fishermen who knew these waters well. They had spent many nights crossing this very lake beneath the stars. As the boat drifted farther from the shoreline, the voices of the villages faded into the distance. The world around them grew quiet. Only the gentle sound of water brushing against the sides of the boat remained. Jesus moved toward the back of the vessel. The long day had left him tired. The quiet rhythm of the water and the cool evening air created a peaceful stillness. Soon, he lay down near the stern of the boat, resting his head against a cushion. And before long, he fell asleep. The disciples guided the boat steadily across the calm lake. The sky above them slowly deepened into shades of purple and blue. Stars began to appear one by one. For a while, everything remained peaceful. But far in the distance, dark clouds slowly gathered above the hills. At first, the wind was gentle, just a quiet breeze brushing across the water. Then the wind began to grow stronger. The surface of the lake shifted. Small waves formed and moved toward the boat. The air grew colder. The peaceful evening began to change. Within moments, the wind rose sharply across the lake. The calm water turned restless. Waves grew larger, crashing against the sides of the small boat. The disciples quickly moved to steady the vessel. They pulled ropes tighter. They adjusted the sail. But the storm was growing stronger. The sky above them darkened. The wind howled across the water. Waves rose higher and higher, splashing over the sides of the boat. Water began to fill the bottom of the vessel. The disciples worked desperately to keep the boat afloat. These were experienced fishermen. They had faced storms before. But this one felt different. The wind roared across the lake with frightening power. The boat rocked violently as waves crashed against it. Fear began to rise inside their hearts. And in the middle of it all, Jesus was still asleep. The disciples looked toward the back of the boat in disbelief. How could he sleep through such a storm? Finally, unable to contain their fear any longer, they rushed to him. "Teacher!" they shouted. "Don't you care that we are going to drown?" Their voices carried both fear and desperation. Jesus slowly opened his eyes. He sat up and looked around at the chaos surrounding them. The wind whipped across the lake. The waves crashed loudly against the boat. The storm raged with full force. Then Jesus stood. The boat continued rocking beneath his feet, but he remained steady. He looked out across the stormy sea. And in the midst of all that noise and chaos, he spoke only a few quiet words. "Peace, be still." And suddenly, everything changed. The wind stopped. The waves settled. The violent storm that had filled the sky only moments before disappeared. The surface of the lake became smooth again. The water that had been crashing and roaring now lay still beneath the night sky. The silence that followed was deep and calm. The disciples stood frozen in amazement. Just moments earlier, they had been certain the storm would overwhelm them. Now the sea was peaceful once again. Jesus turned toward them gently and asked, "Why are you so afraid?" The disciples looked at one another, trying to understand what had just happened. Even the wind and the waves obeyed him. And in that quiet moment, beneath the stars above the calm sea, they realized something powerful. The same voice that calmed the storm had been with them the entire time. Sometimes our thoughts can feel like that storm. Worries rising suddenly, questions moving through our minds again and again, thoughts crashing into one another like restless waves. But just like the storm that night on the Sea of Galilee, peace can return. And tonight, You do not have to calm every storm within your mind. You can simply rest, because the same God who brought peace to the waves is watching over you tonight. And just like that quiet lake beneath the night sky, your thoughts can grow calm again. Elijah finds rest in the wilderness. Our next story tonight is about a man who had carried so much responsibility that his heart and mind eventually became overwhelmed. It is the story of the prophet Elijah. Elijah had witnessed incredible things. He had seen the power of God move in ways that left people astonished. He had spoken boldly when others were afraid to speak. He had stood firm during moments when he felt completely alone. But even the strongest people eventually reach a moment when their strength begins to fade. The events that had just unfolded in Elijah's life had been intense. For a long time, he had faced opposition from powerful leaders who rejected the ways of God. He had spoken truth when others refused to listen. He had stood alone when many had turned away. And though Elijah had seen God work powerfully, the weight of everything he had experienced had slowly begun to press heavily on his heart. The mind can only carry so much before it grows tired. Sometimes even people with great faith reach moments when their thoughts feel tangled and their energy feels drained. And that is where we find Elijah in this story. The journey had brought him far from the busy places of the cities, far from the noise of crowds, far from the pressures that had surrounded him. He walked alone into the wilderness. The land stretched wide and open before him. The wilderness in that region was quiet and vast. Rolling hills of dry earth stretched beneath a wide sky. Scattered trees offered small islands of shade across the open land. The air felt still. The sounds of the world were distant. Only the wind occasionally moved across the hills, carrying soft whispers through the branches of the trees. Elijah had traveled far that day. The sun had risen high above the desert landscape, and the heat of the journey had slowly drained the last of his strength. His footsteps grew slower. Each step felt heavier than the one before. Finally, he came upon a small tree standing alone in the quiet wilderness. Its branches stretched outward, offering shade beneath the warm sky. Elijah walked toward it and lowered himself to the ground beneath its shelter. The quietness of the wilderness surrounded him. For the first time in a long while, there was no one asking questions, no crowds gathering, no conflict, just silence. And in that quiet moment, Elijah spoke honestly to God. He admitted something that many people feel, but sometimes hesitate to say. He was tired, not just physically tired, but mentally and emotionally tired as well. Sometimes the weight of life can slowly build in ways we do not notice at first. One difficult moment leads to another. One responsibility leads to another. One worry leads to another. Until eventually the mind begins to feel full, heavy, overwhelmed. Elijah lay down beneath the tree. The warm earth beneath him held the heat of the day. The branches above him rustled softly as the breeze passed through them. The quiet rhythm of the wilderness surrounded him, and slowly, his eyes began to close. Sometimes the most healing thing a person can do is simply rest. Elijah drifted into sleep beneath the quiet shade of the tree. Time passed gently in the stillness of the wilderness. Then something unexpected happened. An angel touched Elijah softly. The touch was gentle, not alarming, and a quiet voice spoke. "Get up and eat." Elijah slowly opened his eyes. Beside him, he noticed something remarkable. There was fresh bread baked over warm stones. and a jar filled with cool water. In the quiet wilderness where Elijah had felt so alone, God had quietly provided exactly what he needed: food, water, rest. Nothing complicated, nothing overwhelming, just simple care. Elijah sat up slowly. He ate the bread and drank the water. The nourishment began restoring his strength little by little. Then he lay down again beneath the tree and rested once more. The desert wind moved softly through the branches above him. The quiet sky stretched wide overhead. There was no rush, no pressure, only rest. After some time passed, the angel returned again. Once more the gentle voice spoke. "Get up and eat, for the journey ahead of you is long." Again Elijah noticed the food and water beside him. Once again he ate, and as he did, something began to change within him. Strength slowly returned to his body. His breathing grew calmer. His mind began to quiet. Sometimes when life feels overwhelming, we imagine that the solution must be something large, a dramatic answer, a complicated plan, a sudden change. But in Elijah's moment of exhaustion, God responded with something simple: rest, care, time to recover. The quiet wilderness that had once felt lonely now felt peaceful. The sky above him stretched wide and endless, and Elijah began to realize something important. Even in the wilderness, God had never left him. Even in his most exhausted moment, he had not been forgotten. Sometimes when our minds feel overwhelmed, we believe we must keep pushing forward. But Elijah's story reminds us that God often invites us to pause, to rest, to breathe, to allow our strength to return. Night slowly approached the wilderness. The sky shifted into deep shades of blue. Stars began appearing one by one above the quiet land. The same God who had provided bread and water in the desert was still watching over Elijah, guiding him gently toward the next part of his journey. But for now, rest was enough. And beneath the quiet sky of the wilderness, Elijah allowed himself to be still. Just like Elijah beneath that quiet tree, you are allowed to rest tonight. You do not have to carry every burden into tomorrow. You do not have to solve every problem before sleep arrives. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is simply pause, to breathe, to allow the mind to slow down, to trust that God is still working quietly in our lives, even when we cannot see it clearly. Tonight, like Elijah in the wilderness, you can rest and allow your mind to grow calm. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. Our next story tonight comes from words that have comforted people for thousands of years. Words written by a man named David. David had once been a shepherd himself, long before he became king, long before people knew his name. David spent many quiet days and nights in the hills watching over sheep. Those years taught him something important about care, about protection, about quiet guidance. And from those peaceful fields, David wrote words that continue to bring calm to restless hearts even today. He began with a simple sentence: "The Lord is my shepherd." For David, this was not just poetry. It was something he had experienced with his own eyes. A shepherd walks beside the flock, watching carefully, guiding gently, protecting quietly. The sheep do not need to understand every path ahead. They simply follow the shepherd who knows the way. And David believed that God cared for people in that same gentle way. The shepherd walks ahead, leading the flock through hills and valleys, across fields and streams, toward places where they can rest. And because of that care, David continued with peaceful confidence, "I shall not want." These words do not mean life will never be difficult, but they carry a deep message of reassurance. When the shepherd is near, the flock is not alone. Even in uncertain places, there is guidance. Even in unfamiliar valleys, there is protection. And David then painted one of the most peaceful images found anywhere in Scripture. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Imagine a wide hillside beneath a soft sky. The grass stretches across the land in gentle waves of green. A quiet breeze moves through the field. The world feels slow here, unhurried, still. Sheep wander peacefully through the pasture, nibbling softly at the grass. The shepherd watches from nearby, calm and attentive, and eventually the sheep lie down. They rest. Animals only lie down when they feel safe, when they know the shepherd is near, and in the same way, God invites our hearts to rest, just like those sheep in the green pastures. Our minds do not always need to keep running. There are moments when we are simply invited to lie down and breathe. David continued with another image of calm. He leads me beside still waters, not rushing rivers, not crashing waves, but still water. Water so calm that it reflects the sky above it like a mirror. Imagine standing beside a quiet pool of water at the edge of a field. The surface is smooth and glass-like. The sky and clouds appear perfectly reflected within it. Nearby, the sheep drink peacefully. There is no noise, no urgency, only the gentle sounds of nature moving quietly around them. The shepherd leads them carefully to this place, because the shepherd understands something important. Still water restores the flock, and in the same way, quiet moments restore the human soul. David then wrote words that continue to bring hope to tired hearts. He restores my soul. Life can be exhausting sometimes. There are days when our minds carry too many thoughts, moments when worries pile up one after another, seasons when our energy feels completely drained. But restoration is always possible. Just as a traveler finds shade after walking beneath the hot sun, the soul can recover. Peace slowly returns. Strength slowly returns. Hope slowly returns. The shepherd does not rush the process. He guides the flock slowly, patiently, step by step. David continued with gentle confidence. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Sometimes the road ahead feels confusing. We cannot see where it leads. We do not understand every turn along the way. But the shepherd always knows the path. Even when the sheep cannot see beyond the next hill, the shepherd can. And that is why the flock continues forward with quiet trust. Then David acknowledged something that every human life eventually encounters. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the valleys in those lands could be narrow and dark. High cliffs rose on both sides. Sunlight reached the valley floor only in thin beams. But even in those shadowed places, the shepherd walked beside the flock. And David continued with powerful reassurance. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Fear loses its power when we know we are not alone. Just like the sheep walking through a dark valley beside the shepherd, we are never abandoned. David then described the tools the shepherd carried. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The rod protected the flock from danger. The staff gently guided sheep that wandered too far. Both were signs of the shepherd's care, protection, guidance, steady presence. Then David shared another beautiful image. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Even in difficult circumstances, God still provides moments of peace, moments of nourishment, moments of blessing, moments when hope quietly returns. David continued, You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. In those ancient times, shepherds sometimes used oil to care for injured sheep. It soothed wounds, protected them from harm. The image David describes here is one of healing, care, restoration. And finally, David ended with one of the most comforting promises ever written. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Not just on easy days, not only when life feels perfect, but on every day, through every season, through every valley, through every quiet night. And David finished with peaceful certainty. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, a reminder that we are always held within God's care, always guided, always watched over, always loved. Tonight, you can rest beside those still waters. Your mind does not have to keep racing. Your thoughts do not have to keep wandering. Just like the flock resting in green pastures, you are safe to lie down, because the same shepherd David trusted long ago is still watching over you tonight, guiding you, protecting you, walking beside you. And in that quiet presence, your mind can finally grow still. Mary finds peace at Jesus' feet. Our next story tonight takes place in a quiet village called Bethany. Bethany was a small place, a village of stone homes and narrow paths that wound between olive trees and small gardens. It sat not far from the city of Jerusalem, yet life there moved more slowly. People knew one another. Neighbors greeted one another along the paths. And in the evenings, when the sun began to lower in the sky, the village often grew quiet. On one particular day, Jesus and his disciples were traveling through the region. Their journeys had taken them across many towns and villages. They had walked dusty roads beneath the warmth of the sun. They had spoken with crowds who gathered to listen to Jesus teach. And by the time they approached Bethany, the day was slowly coming to an end. Word traveled quickly through the village. Jesus was arriving. In Bethany lived two sisters named Martha and Mary. Their home was a place where Jesus was always welcomed. The sisters respected him deeply and were grateful whenever he visited their village. When Martha heard that Jesus was approaching, she immediately began preparing to receive him. Hospitality was important to her. Guests were never taken lightly. In those days, welcoming someone into your home was an act of honor and care. Food needed to be prepared. The home needed to be arranged. Everything needed to be ready. So Martha quickly began moving through the house. She gathered ingredients. She prepared the meal. She organized the space where their guests would sit. Her hands moved quickly. Her mind moved even faster. There were many details to think about, many tasks to complete. And like many people who cared deeply about doing things well, Martha wanted everything to be just right. Meanwhile, Mary made a very different choice. When Jesus entered the home, he sat down to speak with those who had gathered. His voice was calm and steady as he began sharing his teachings. Mary walked quietly into the room, and instead of rushing to help with preparations, she simply sat down near him. She sat at his feet, and she listened. Outside, the village slowly settled into evening. The light of the sun softened as it moved lower across the hills. Birds crossed the sky overhead. The sounds of distant voices drifted quietly through the air. Inside the house, the room felt peaceful. Jesus spoke calmly. His words carried wisdom and kindness, and Mary listened carefully, allowing the moment to fill her attention. She was not thinking about tomorrow. She was not worrying about unfinished tasks. She was not rushing ahead to the next responsibility. She was simply present. Meanwhile, Martha continued moving through the house. The work seemed endless. Each task led to another. Each responsibility added to the list of things still left to do. The more Martha worked, the more she noticed something that bothered her. Mary was not helping. Her sister was sitting in the other room while she carried the work alone. At first, Martha tried to ignore the feeling, but the frustration slowly grew. Her mind began filling with thoughts. Why am I doing all of this by myself? Doesn't anyone else see how much work there is? Shouldn't Mary be helping? The more she thought about it, the heavier the feeling became. Finally, Martha could not hold the frustration any longer. She walked into the room where Jesus and Mary were sitting. "Lord," she said, "don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying too much. Perhaps you have felt something similar before. Moments when the mind feels full of responsibilities. Moments when the list of things that need to be done seems endless. Moments when the thoughts begin to race faster and faster. Jesus looked at Martha. His expression was not one of anger. It was not one of frustration. Instead, there was gentleness in his voice. "Martha, Martha." When someone repeated a name like this, it was a sign of deep care. "You are worried and troubled about many things." Those words were not meant to criticize. They were meant to acknowledge something true. Martha had allowed the many tasks before her to fill her mind completely. But then Jesus continued with something important. "But only one thing is needed." He then explained that Mary had chosen the better thing. Mary had chosen to sit quietly, to listen, to be present. In that moment, Mary was not allowing her thoughts to rush ahead into tomorrow. She was not carrying the weight of every responsibility all at once. She was simply resting in the presence of Jesus. Sometimes life can feel a lot like Martha's busy day. Our minds move from one responsibility to the next. One worry leads to another. One thought leads to the next. And before we realize it, the mind becomes crowded, heavy, full. But this quiet moment in Bethany reminds us of something important. Not every problem must be solved right now. Not every task must be completed tonight. Sometimes the most peaceful thing we can do is simply sit still, to breathe, to be present. Outside the house, the evening slowly deepened. The sky turned soft shades of purple and blue. Stars began appearing one by one above the quiet village. Inside the room, Mary remained seated beside Jesus, listening, resting, at peace. And in that moment, the house felt calm. The worries of the day faded into the quiet of the evening. Because sometimes the most powerful choice we can make is to step away from the noise of our thoughts and simply rest. Tonight, you are allowed to set your worries down. Just like Mary sitting quietly beside Jesus, you can allow your mind to rest. The tasks of tomorrow will still be there in the morning. But tonight is not for rushing. Tonight is for stillness. Tonight is for peace. You do not have to solve every question. You do not have to carry every responsibility. Instead, you can simply rest in God's presence. And as the quiet of the night grows deeper, your mind can grow quiet too. Do not worry about tomorrow. Our next story takes us to a quiet hillside where Jesus once sat with a group of people who had come to listen to him teach. The day was warm and peaceful. The hillside overlooked fields that stretched gently across the land. Wild grasses moved slowly in the breeze, and small flowers dotted the landscape with soft colors. People had gathered from nearby villages. Some sat on the grass. Others leaned against rocks or trees, listening carefully as Jesus spoke. The world in those days was not so different from the world we live in now. People still carried worries. They thought about tomorrow. They wondered how they would provide for their families. They worried about food, clothing, and the many uncertainties of life. And as Jesus looked out across the crowd that day, he saw those same concerns resting quietly on their faces. He understood something about the human mind. It has a way of reaching forward into tomorrow, of imagining problems that have not yet arrived, of carrying burdens that may never come. So Jesus began speaking gently to the people gathered around him. "Therefore I tell you," he said, "do not worry about your life." The words were simple, yet they carried a deep sense of peace. "Do not worry about what you will eat or drink," he continued, "or about your body, what you will wear." Then Jesus pointed toward the sky above them. Birds moved freely through the air, gliding on the warm currents of wind. They soared across the hills and dipped low over the fields. Their songs drifted through the quiet afternoon. And Jesus said, "Look at the birds of the air. They do not plant seeds. They do not harvest crops. They do not store food away in barns. And yet," he said gently, "your heavenly Father feeds them." The people listening looked up. They watched the birds moving effortlessly across the sky. Their lives were simple. They woke each morning and flew into the open air, trusting that what they needed would be there. Then Jesus asked a question. "Are you not much more valuable than they?" The question hung softly in the air. If God cared for the birds that flew above the hills, how much more would he care for the people standing before him? Then Jesus continued with another thought. "Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life?" The crowd grew quiet, because the answer was obvious. Worry feels powerful, but in truth it does very little. It cannot change tomorrow. It cannot solve every problem. It simply fills the mind with restless thoughts. Jesus then turned their attention to something growing quietly around them. Small flowers scattered across the hillside, wild lilies rising from the grass. "Consider the lilies of the field," he said. "See how they grow. They do not labor. They do not spin thread to make clothing. Yet I tell you," he said, "not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." The lilies stood quietly in the sunlight. They did not rush. They did not worry about tomorrow. They simply grew, and in their quiet existence, they displayed a beauty greater than the finest clothing of kings. Then Jesus spoke words meant to release the weight people carried in their minds. "If that is how God clothes the grass of the field," he said, "will he not much more clothe you?" Jesus understood that human hearts often struggle to trust this. The mind tends to hold tightly to worry, but again he spoke gently. So do not worry. Do not say, "What shall we eat?" Or "What shall we drink?" Or "What shall we wear?" These are the things people chase after, he said. But your heavenly Father already knows that you need them. God was not unaware of their lives. He had not forgotten them. And then Jesus gave them a simple way to live. Seek first the kingdom of God, he said, and all these things will be given to you as well. In other words, place your attention on what truly matters. Trust that the rest will unfold in time. And finally, Jesus ended with words that continue to calm restless minds even today. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. The people listening that afternoon sat quietly as the breeze moved through the grass around them. The birds continued gliding across the sky. The lilies continued growing quietly in the field. And in that peaceful place, Jesus reminded them of something simple but powerful. Life is not meant to be carried all at once. Tomorrow does not need to be solved today. Sometimes the most peaceful thing we can do is trust. Trust that God sees us. Trust that God knows our needs. Trust that tomorrow will arrive when it is meant to. And until then, we are allowed to rest. Tonight, you do not need to carry tomorrow. The worries about what may happen next can gently rest for now, just like the birds flying freely through the sky. You can release the weight of the future. Just like the lilies growing quietly in the field, you can allow life to unfold one moment at a time. God already knows your needs. God is already watching over your life. And tonight, your mind is allowed to rest. The shepherd who searches for one lost sheep. Our next story takes place among the quiet hills where shepherds once cared for their flocks. In those days, shepherds spent long hours outdoors. They walked across open hillsides where grass grew between scattered rocks. They guided their sheep from one field to another, always searching for places where the animals could rest and eat peacefully. The life of a shepherd was slow and steady. Day after day they walked beside the flock, watching carefully, listening for danger, guiding the sheep toward safe paths. Sheep depend completely on the shepherd. They cannot easily find their way alone. They follow the one who leads them. And Jesus once told a story about a shepherd that many people remembered for the rest of their lives. He asked a simple question. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep, Jesus said. The people listening could easily picture the scene, a shepherd standing on a hillside, a large flock moving slowly through the grass, the quiet sounds of sheep grazing beneath the open sky. Then Jesus continued, and suppose one of those sheep wanders away. It was something that happened often. Sheep sometimes wandered while grazing. They followed a patch of grass a little too far, or drifted away while the flock moved across the hills. Soon the sheep might find itself alone, far from the flock, far from the shepherd. A single sheep alone in the wilderness would quickly become frightened. Without the shepherd nearby, it would not know which direction to go. The wide hills that once seemed peaceful could suddenly feel confusing. But Jesus asked another question. What will the shepherd do? Will he simply ignore the one sheep that wandered away? Will he say, "Well, I still have 99 sheep left"? Number. Jesus explained that the shepherd does something very different. He leaves the 99 sheep resting safely in the open field, and then he goes searching. Step by step, the shepherd walks across the hills. The sun slowly lowers toward the horizon. The light of the day softens. Still, the shepherd continues searching. He looks carefully between the rocks, across the valleys, along the narrow paths winding through the hills. The shepherd calls out, listening carefully for the sound of the lost sheep. Sometimes the journey takes time, but the shepherd does not stop, because every sheep matters. Finally, somewhere in the quiet hills, the shepherd hears something, a faint sound, a frightened cry. The lost sheep has been found. The shepherd walks toward the sound and sees the small animal standing alone among the rocks. Instead of anger, there is relief. The shepherd gently lifts the sheep onto his shoulders, and with careful steps, he begins walking back toward the flock. The long search is over. The lost sheep is safe again. Jesus said that when the shepherd returns home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, and he says, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." Then Jesus shared the deeper meaning of the story. God cares for every single person. No one is overlooked. No one is forgotten. Just like the shepherd who searches for one wandering sheep, God notices every life, even when someone feels alone, even when someone believes they have drifted too far. The shepherd still searches, still calls, still brings them home. Tonight, you are not forgotten. Just like the shepherd who searched through the quiet hills for one lost sheep, God sees you. God knows where you are. Even in moments when life feels uncertain, even when the mind feels restless, you are still known. You are still cared for. And tonight, you can rest knowing that you are never alone. The same shepherd who walked through the hills searching for one sheep is watching over you even now. And as the quiet of the night grows deeper, your mind can slowly grow calm. You are safe to rest. Jesus praying alone in the quiet night. Our final story tonight takes us into a quiet moment of stillness. A moment that happened many times during the life of Jesus. It is not a story of crowds or miracles. It is a story of quiet, of stillness, of a peaceful night spent alone with God. During the years that Jesus traveled from village to village, many people followed him. They came hoping to hear his words. They came seeking healing, comfort, and hope. Sometimes the crowds were so large that there was barely room to move. People gathered in fields. They stood along roadsides. They filled homes and courtyards. Everyone wanted to hear what Jesus would say next. The days were often long. Jesus spent hours speaking with people, listening to their struggles, answering their questions. He cared for the sick. He comforted those who were hurting. He encouraged those who felt lost. But after those long days, Jesus often did something very important. He stepped away from the crowds. He found quiet places, places where the noise of the world faded into silence. Sometimes he walked into the hills outside the villages. Sometimes he traveled along quiet paths that wound through olive trees and fields. Sometimes he went to places where only the sounds of nature remained. The disciples noticed this habit. Again and again they saw Jesus step away to pray. One evening, after a long day of teaching and helping others, the village slowly grew quiet. The sun had already slipped below the horizon. Soft colors lingered in the sky as evening settled across the land. The people who had gathered that day began returning to their homes. Families walked along narrow paths lit by the fading light. Small lamps flickered in the windows of houses across the village. Gradually, the voices of the crowds faded. The busy day was over, and as night arrived, Jesus quietly left the village. He walked along a narrow path leading into the hills. The air had grown cooler. A gentle breeze moved softly across the land. The sky above was slowly filling with stars. The hills surrounding the village were peaceful at night. Tall grasses rustled quietly in the wind. Olive trees stood scattered across the landscape. Their branches moved gently beneath the moonlight. Jesus continued walking until the village lights were far behind him. Soon the only sounds that remained were the quiet rhythms of nature, the soft wind moving through the grass, the distant call of night birds, the quiet stillness of the hills. Finally, Jesus reached a place where he could sit. It was a small rise overlooking the land below. From there, he could see the distant glow of the village where the people slept. The night sky stretched wide above him. Thousands of stars shimmered softly across the darkness. In moments like this, the world felt calm, still, peaceful. Jesus sat quietly beneath the open sky, and he began to pray. Prayer for Jesus was not rushed. It was not hurried. It was a quiet conversation with the Father. In those moments of stillness, the noise of the day faded away. The questions of the crowds no longer filled the air. The responsibilities of the day rested quietly behind him. Only peace remained. Perhaps you have experienced moments like this. Moments when the world finally grows quiet, when the noise fades, when the mind begins to slow. Those moments often arrive late at night, when the sky is dark and the stars appear, when the air grows cooler and the world begins to sleep. Jesus often chose those quiet hours to pray, because silence creates space for the heart to rest. As the night deepened around him, Jesus remained there on the hillside. The stars slowly crossed the sky above. The moon cast soft light across the land. Everything moved at a slower rhythm. No rushing, no urgency, no crowds calling his name. Just quiet, just peace, just time spent in the presence of God. And in that quiet place, Jesus found renewal. Strength returned. Peace settled deeply within his heart, because even the Son of God understood the importance of stepping away from the noise of the world, of allowing the mind to grow quiet, of resting in the presence of God. Eventually, the night grew deeper. The village below remained silent as people slept in their homes. The hills remained calm beneath the stars. Jesus continued praying quietly, and in those peaceful hours the world felt still. A gentle reminder that even in busy lives, there are moments meant for quiet, moments meant for stillness, moments meant for rest. Tonight, you can experience a moment like the one Jesus found on that quiet hillside. The noise of the day is fading. The responsibilities of today no longer need your attention. Just like the village resting beneath the night sky, you are allowed to rest too. Your mind does not need to keep moving. Your thoughts do not need to keep searching for answers. Instead, you can simply be still. Just as Jesus sat quietly beneath the stars, you can rest in God's presence tonight. The world will continue turning. Tomorrow will arrive in its own time. But for now, this moment is peaceful. This moment is quiet, and your mind can slowly drift into rest. Resting in the quiet presence of God. As the quiet of the night continues around you, Allow your mind to grow slower. The stories you have heard tonight are gentle reminders of something simple and comforting. Peace is possible. Just as the storm on the Sea of Galilee grew calm, your thoughts can grow calm too. Just as Elijah rested beneath the quiet tree in the wilderness, you are allowed to rest tonight. Just as the shepherd guided his flock beside still waters, God is gently guiding your life as well. And just like Mary sitting quietly beside Jesus, you do not need to carry every worry into this moment. Tonight is not a time for solving every problem. Tonight is not a time for answering every question. Tonight is simply a time to rest. The day has come to an end. The responsibilities of today have already been carried, and whatever tomorrow may bring will arrive in its own time. For now, you can let your breathing slow. Let the tension leave your body. Let your thoughts become softer. Imagine once more the peaceful scenes from the stories tonight. The calm sea resting beneath the night sky. The quiet wilderness where Elijah slept beneath the tree. The green pastures and still waters of the shepherd's care. The peaceful home in Bethany where Mary sat and listened. The hillside where the lilies grew quietly in the sun. The shepherd walking through the hills searching for one lost sheep. The quiet mountain where Jesus prayed beneath the stars. Each of these moments carries the same gentle message. God is near. God is watching over you. And you are safe to rest. You do not have to carry the weight of the world tonight. You do not have to control tomorrow. You can simply rest in the quiet care of God. And as sleep slowly comes, allow the peace of this moment to remain with you. Thank you for this quiet moment of rest. Thank you for the reminder that we do not walk through life alone. Tonight we place our worries into your hands, the questions we cannot answer, the concerns about tomorrow, the thoughts that have been racing through our minds. We release them to you. Fill this quiet night with your peace. Let every restless thought grow calm. Let every anxious feeling fade into stillness. Watch over each person listening tonight. Surround them with comfort. Guide them with gentle care. And allow their minds to rest deeply. Just as the world grows quiet beneath the stars, let their hearts grow quiet too. And as sleep arrives, let your peace remain with them through the night. Amen.